All right, so last video for this chapter. And again, you have to understand this is a general biology class, and so we're just scratching on the surface of this stuff, okay? So, respiration. Here's a summary. Again, summaries are always wonderful. I love pictures. Pictures say 1,000 words, and here it is. So, cellular respiration. So, breaking down sugar to release ATP, then our cells can use ATP for work. Okay, so glycolysis, lysol, breaking down specifically glucose. So when we break down glucose into pyruvate, we release ATP. Not that much ATP, but a few ATP molecules. Then pyruvate, right, gets converted into this thing called acetyl-CoA. This happens in the mitochondria. So we said the mitochondria are like the little power plants. They're the energy for the cell. Here it is. Goes through the mitochondria, right? Goes through the Krebs cycle, and we release a lot more ATP. Now here, this is where we need oxygen, people. This is why we breathe. So we need the oxygen. It's like the final electron acceptor to pump out those ATP. And also here we pump out the carbon dioxide. So this is the overview of cellular respiration. All right. So okay, blah, 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 blah. Okay, we're fine here. All right. There are alternative pathways to energy acquisition. So cellular respiration is not the only one. There are other ways in which organisms can release energy. So here's a cheetah, right? One of the fastest animals, terrestrial animal here. So there's what's called aerobic pathways. There are what are called anaerobic. Aerobic, requiring oxygen, okay? So oxygen is the final electron acceptor to pump out those ATPs. There are what are called anaerobic, so releasing ATP without the use of oxygen. Okay, so other organisms can do this, and this is how alcohol is made. It says beer, wine, spirits are byproducts of cellular metabolism in the absence of oxygen, okay? We can do this, but we're not strict anaerobes. Those are the terms they use as anaerobes. So, for example, let's say you're running and you run really, really hard and you feel that burn in your muscle. You might switch into anaerobic, but again, we're never perfect anaerobes. So here it says, during strenuous exercise, our muscles can require more oxygen than are available to them. So they go into this mode. So here, respiration, right? So we use oxygen. Think of aerobic exercise, right? So, when do you start breathing harder, etc.? If you get on the treadmill and you start running, you're breathing harder. Why? Why? Because you need more oxygen. Why? To break down the sugars to release ATP, to power the muscle. Okay? So here, cellular respiration, oxygen, right? And product water. So we do this. But what if we push even harder, okay? Then we just do glycolysis, and the pyruvate can become lactic acid, and that's what causes that burn, okay? And in yeast, so for example, yeast do this, and they release ethanol, and that makes alcohol. So with yeast, if you give them barley, right, they're going to make beer. If you give them grapes, they're going to make wine. If you give them potatoes, they're going to make vodka. But the process is they're using the sugar out of the different plants to get energy in the form of ATP, and their byproduct, the waste product, is ethanol. It's alcohol. And so we use this process for our advantage when we make alcohol. So it says exertion without enough oxygen leads to burning. In animals, for us, we make lactic acid and it burns. But with yeast, it makes alcohol. So here, for example, making beer, okay? It's from anaerobic respiration. So it's respiration. They're breaking down the sugar, okay, in the hops and the barley to make ATP, and the byproduct is alcohol. All right. Oxygen deficiency limits the breakdown of fuel because the electron transport chain requires oxygen. When oxygen is unavailable, yeast resort to fermentation, in which they use a different electron acceptor, pyruvate, and the process generates ethanol, and that's alcohol in beer, wine, spirits. Lastly, right now, when we talked about respiration, it was breaking down sugar to make ATP. What if we don't have sugar? Can we break down other things? The answer is yes. The primary energy molecule is sugar, right? So glucose, starch, right? Those polysaccharides. But if we don't have those, our body can break down other molecules to get ATP to do work. Okay. So carbohydrates, right here, energy from fats, carbohydrates, proteins. Carbohydrates are the main ones. They're the first ones that are going to be used to make that ATP. So simple sugars, glycolysis, Krebs cycle, electron, okay, energy. But if we don't have the carbohydrates, fats can be broken down. Remember, fats, they're carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen also. They fatty acids, and they can be made into these intermediates that then can go into the Krebs cycle to release ATP. Or proteins can also, right? They're made into amino acids, and then they can go in and then release ATP. So eating complete diet, cells can run on protein and fats as well as glucose. Some of those diets that you hear about, like the Atkins diet, is it the paleo diet? Where you're just eating fat and protein and you're like, oh, you're going to lose more weight. Well, the reason why we have to undergo these other reactions to release that ATP. It's not so simple as just releasing it from the sugars. All right. Okay. So that is the end of this chapter, right? So the whole thing, energy flowing from the sun through all life on Earth, photosynthesis, using the energy to make food, cellular respiration, converting the food into ATP to do work, and then some organisms can undergo things other than respiration, right? So anaerobic respiration or fermentation. Okay, we are done with chapter 4. See you later. Bye.